The Galactic Council had existed for 40,000 years. In that time it had solved wars between star systems, stopped plagues that could kill entire species, and built wonders that stretch across the black emptiness. Between galaxies, the Council had faced every kind of problem that intelligent life could create, but now for the first time in recorded history, the Council had failed. High Counselor HFY stood at the center of the grand chamber on Nexus Prime, the great station that floated in neutral space, where no empire could claim ownership. Around him rose tier after tier of seats, each one holding a representative from one of the 147 species that had joined the galactic community. Their forms were endlessly varied. Some were tall and thin like living shadows. Others were masses of crystal that sang when they spoke. A few existed only as patterns of light contained in special chambers, but today all of them shared the same expression, translated across 1,000 different kinds of faces. Fear. 11 years, Thro said, his voice carrying through the translation systems that let every species understand every other. 11 years since we discovered the axiom key. 11 years since our greatest minds began their work, and still the puzzle remains unsolved. On the display behind him floated an image of the key itself. It looked simple at first glance, just a sphere of dark metal about the size of a human head, but anyone who looked closer could see the symbols that moved across its surface, shifting and changing like living things. Those symbols were the puzzle. They formed a cipher, a code, a lock that protected whatever secrets lay inside. According to the ancient records, the key had been built by the precursors, a species that had disappeared from the galaxy 1,000,000 years before any current civilization learned to walk upright. The precursors had been gods compared to modern species. They had built structures that still floated between stars. They had created machines that could bend the laws of nature, and before they vanished, they had hidden something inside the axiom key. Some records suggested it was a weapon capable of destroying stars. Others claimed it was a power source that could keep civilizations running for eternity. No one knew for certain. All anyone knew was that the key existed, that it contained something of enormous importance, and that no one could open it. We have tried everything, Thex continued. The quantum minds of the Vareth Collective spent 3 years processing the cipher's patterns. The thought waivers of Axis Prime contributed their greatest seers. Species with 17 different forms of perception have examined every aspect of the puzzle. All have failed. A rumble of discontent rolled through the chamber. Everyone knew this already. They had watched the attempts and the failures. They had seen the greatest intellects in the galaxy admit defeat one after another. But that was not the worst part. Each attempt has made the puzzle stronger, Threll said. The key learns, it adapts. Every failure teaches it new defenses. What was merely difficult 11 years ago has become nearly impossible today. This was the true horror of the situation. The precursors had not just built lock, they had built a lock that got better at staying locked the more you tried to open it. Every brilliant mind that touched the puzzle made it harder for the next one, and now time was running out. Our intelligence networks report that the Kremlinian is developing a brute force solution. THRX said they intend to crack the key open with raw power regardless of consequences. The Chamber erupted in angry voices. The Kree Dominion was not a member of the Council. They were a military empire that had spent centuries conquering their region of space. They believed in strength above all else. They did not care about ancient wisdom or careful study. They saw the key as a prize to be taken, and they would destroy it rather than let anyone else have it. If the CF break the key open, Thrall said, raising his voice above the chaos, we have no idea what will happen. The precursor technology inside could save us all, or it could destroy half the galaxy. We cannot let that happen. Then what do you suggest? Called a voice from the upper tiers. It was Threk, a being made of living crystal who had spent 6 years personally studying the puzzle. His voice rang like broken glass. We have tried everything. You said it yourself. What option remains? THRX took a deep breath. What he was about to suggest went against every tradition of the Council. It was desperate. It was foolish. It might even be insulting. I propose we open the challenge to anyone, he said. Any species, any individual, no restrictions, no qualifications. Silence fell over the chamber. Then slowly, laughter began to build. The representatives could not believe what they were hearing. Open the greatest puzzle in galactic history to random individuals, 2 unproven species, 2 minds that had not spent decades training in precursor mathematics. The High Counselor has lost his reason. Someone said, desperation has driven him mad, said another. THRX waited for the noise to die down. I understand your concerns, he said calmly, but consider our position. Our best have failed. Each failure makes future success less likely. Perhaps we need a different approach. Perhaps we need a mind that will not make the same mistakes our trained experts make. The laughter continued, but quieter now. Some representatives were starting to think about his words. In the human section, Ambassador Sarah Chen leaned forward. Humanity was still a young species by galactic standards. They had only joined the Council 200 years ago, and most older species still thought of them as children playing at civilization. But Chen had survived 20 years of galactic politics. She knew an opportunity when she saw one. She pressed the button that requested speaking rights. The chair recognizes the human delegation, THRL said, a note of curiosity in his voice. Chen stood. She was a small woman with gray hair and sharp eyes, and she spoke with the confidence of someone who had nothing to prove. Humanity formally expresses interest in the High Counselor's proposal, she said. More laughter, louder this time. The humans, the species that had barely mastered faster than light travel, the species whose home world was so dangerous that their own bodies were designed for constant combat with their environment. What could humans possibly contribute to a puzzle that had defeated the greatest minds in existence? Chen ignored the laughter. She had expected it. We have some experience with problems that seem impossible, she said, and we have learned that sometimes the answer comes from an unexpected direction. The session continued for several more hours, but in the end, Threll's proposal passed. Desperation won over tradition. Any species, any individual could now attempt to solve the axiom key. Most representatives assumed nothing would come of it. They returned to their quarters and their ships, ready to wait for the inevitable failure of whoever was foolish enough to try next. But 3 days later, a small transport Ship arrived at Nexus Prime. It was a human vessel, unremarkable in every way. When it docked, only a handful of people emerged. Ambassador Chen was there too. Meet them, with her was a team of human psychologists, a woman who looked worried and tired, and a boy, Marcus. Webb was 12 years old. He had messy brown hair that he had clearly tried and failed to comb. He wore clothes that were slightly too large for him. He carried a backpack that was covered in patches and stickers from places on Earth. He looked around the docking bay with wide eyes, taking in the alien architecture and the strange beings that moved through the corridors beyond. Is this really a space station? He asked, his voice filled with wonder. Yes, Marcus. Ambassador Chen said, this is Nexus Prime. It's so big, the boy said. How do people find their way around? There are guides and maps, Chen said. You'll learn the layout quickly. Marcus's mother, Dr. Linda Webb, put a hand on her son's shoulder. She was a mathematician herself, a professor at a university on Earth. She had spent the entire journey trying to talk people out of this plan. Her son was not a tool to be used. He was not a weapon to be aimed at galactic problems. He was a child. But Marcus had insisted on coming. When he heard about the puzzle, his eyes had lit up in a way she recognized. It was the same look he got when he found a new mathematics problem to solve, a new pattern to explore. He lived for puzzles. They were not work for him. They were joy. Are you sure about this? She asked. Not for the first time, Mom, Marcus said with the patient tone of a child explaining something obvious to a slow adult. They have a puzzle that no one can solve. I have to at least look at it. The next day, word spread through Nexus Prime that the human delegation had brought someone to attempt the key. Curious representatives gathered in the observation gallery above the axiom chamber to watch. When they saw Marcus, the laughter started again. A child, Counselor Vithrak said, his crystal body ringing with disbelief. They sent a child, the humans. Marcus said. Another representative. This is an insult to the council. Perhaps they misunderstood the challenge, suggested a third. Humans are young. They may not comprehend what they are dealing with. Ambassador Chen stood firm against the criticism. Marcus Webb is the winner of the International Mathematics Olympiad, she said. He has solved problems that stumped professional mathematicians. His mind works differently than most. Differently, Vithrak repeated. You send a child to solve a puzzle that defeated the quantum minds of the question hung in the air of the axiom chamber like an unexpected guest at a formal dinner. Representatives in the observation gallery above shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Some looked at each other with confusion. Others simply stared at the human child below as if he had started speaking in a language their translators could not process. Fun, Counselor V3 finally said, his crystalline voice sharp with disbelief. The boy asks about fun. Marcus Webb looked up at the gallery with genuine curiosity on his face. He did not seem to notice that hundreds of the galaxy's most important beings were looking at him like he had lost his mind. Yes, he said, fun games, things they did when they were not building stuff. Everyone does something for fun, right? Even really smart aliens. A scholar from the archival order, a species that had dedicated their entire civilization to preserving knowledge, spoke up. We have extensive records of precursor achievements. Their mathematical frameworks, their engineering, principles, their methods of faster than light travel, we do not have records of. Their leisure activities, why not? Marcus asked. The scholar paused. It was a simple question, but no one had a good answer when studying an ancient civilization powerful enough to build devices like the axiom key. Why would anyone care about what they did for fun? Such information was not considered relevant, the scholar finally said. Marcus frowned. He looked back at the floating sphere in front of him, watching the symbols shift and chain across its surface. Then he shook his head slowly. I think maybe it is relevant, he said quietly. The session ended without any progress. Representatives left the gallery, most of them convinced that humanity had wasted everyone's time. A few were simply puzzled. What kind of approach to puzzle solving involved asking about games and hobbies? That night Marcus sat in the quarters assigned to the human delegation. His mother watched him from across the room as he filled page after page of his notebook with sketches and notes. He had barely touched his dinner. Marcus, Linda Webb said gently, "You need to eat something in a minute." "Mom, you said that an hour ago." Marcus looked up and she saw the familiar fire in his eyes. It was the look he always got when a puzzle had grabbed hold of his imagination and would not let go. She had seen it 100 times before, when he worked on competition problems or explored mathematical theories that most adults could not follow. But this time there was something else mixed in with the excitement, something that looked almost like sadness. Mommy said, "I don't think it's a lock." "What do you mean?" He held up his notebook. The pages were covered with drawings of the key, showing the patterns of symbols from different angles, but mixed in with the technical sketches were other drawings, faces, shapes that might have been buildings or machine scenes that looked almost like they came from a storybook. "Everyone treats it like a lock," Marcus said, "like there's a treasure inside and they need to find the right key to open it, so they attack it with math and logic and computers. They try to beat it. That's usually how puzzles work," Linda said. "But that's the thing." Marcus sat down his notebook and looked at his mother with an intensity that seemed too old for his young face. "It's not acting like a lock. Every time someone tries to beat it, it gets stronger. It learns. It adapts, like it's protecting itself. The council knows that. That's why they're so worried. But why would the precursors build a lock that gets harder to open the more you try? That's not good security. That's just mean. You'd never be able to get your own stuff back if you forgot the combination." Linda had to admit she had never thought about it that way. The council had treated the key's adaptive nature as a security feature, a way to keep unworthy minds from accessing precursor secrets. But Marcus was right. What kind of lock became permanently harder to open with each attempt? You would eventually lock yourself out of your own treasure. "So, what do you think it is?" she asked. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Then he said something that made no logical sense but felt strangely right. "I think it's lonely." The next morning Marcus returned to the Axiom chamber with a new request. He wanted to see any records that existed about precursor children. The archivists were reluctant. Such records were rare and considered unimportant. They had fragments of precursor educational systems, evidence that young precursors had existed and been taught by their elders, but detailed information about childhood, play or development. Such things had not been priorities for preservation. Marcus insisted. He spent hours going through ancient files, looking at images and documents that had been ignored for thousands of years. Most representatives had stopped bothering to watch him. Only Council of Vithrak remained as crystalline form, catching the light as he observed from the gallery with growing frustration. "This is absurd," Bethrek said to Ambassador Chen, who had also stayed to watch. "The child wastes time on irrelevant history while the Kremlin prepares to destroy everything we have worked for." Marcus has his own methods, Chen replied calmly. "Methods?" Vithrak's voice rang like shattering glass. "He drew pictures yesterday, today. He reads children's stories. This is not method, this is madness perhaps, but perhaps it is a madness we need." Vithrak made a sound of disgust and turned to leave, but before he could go, Marcus called up from the chamber floor. "Counselor, can I ask you something?" The crystalline being paused. Despite his frustration, he could not bring himself to ignore a direct question. It went against his nature. "What is it, child?" "When you were young," Marcus said, "did your people play hiding games?" The question stopped. Vithrak called. For a long moment, he simply stood there, light reflecting through his crystalline body and shifting patterns. "I do not see how that is relevant," he finally said. "Maybe it isn't," Marcus agreed, "but I'm curious. Did you play hiding games?" "I mean games where someone hides and someone else tries to find them." Vithrak was silent for so long that Marcus thought he would not answer. Then slowly, the crystalline counselor spoke. "When I was very young," he said, "before my crystal matrix fully formed, we played a game called Seek. One of us would hide in the caves of our home world, and the others would try to find them by following the patterns of light they left behind." "Did you like it?" Yes, I enjoyed it very much." Vithrak sounded surprised by his own answer. "I had not thought about it in centuries." Marcus smiled. It was a warm, genuine smile that seemed out of place in the serious atmosphere of the Axiom chamber. "I think the precursors played hiding games too," he said, "and I think this," he pointed at the key, "might be part of a really, really long game." Vithro stared at the human child. Then he looked at the floating sphere of the Axiom key, really looked at it for the first time in years. He had spent so long treating it as an obstacle, a barrier, a problem to be solved. He had never once considered that it might be something else entirely. "That is an interesting theory," he said quietly. That night Marcus shared his thoughts with his mother and the team of human psychologists who had accompanied them. "Everyone has been treating the puzzle like an enemy," he explained, spreading his notes across the table. "In their quarters, they attack it and it defends itself. They try to trick it and it learns their tricks. But what if it's not supposed to be an enemy? What if it's supposed to be a friend?" Dr. Alina Vasquez, the lead psychologist, leaned forward with interest. "Go on." "The precursors built it 1,000,000 years ago." Marcus said. "They knew they were going to be gone someday. All species eventually disappear, right? So they left things behind: machines, structures, knowledge." He paused. "But they also left this. Something that thinks, something that learns, something that changes." "You're saying the key is alive?" his mother asked. "Not exactly, but it's not just a lock either." I think Marcus struggled to find the right words. "I think they built it for their children, not for adults. Trying to steal secrets for kids to grow up with, to learn from, to play with. The psychologists exchanged glances. It was an unusual theory, but it fit certain patterns they had observed. The key's behavior did resemble something protecting itself from aggressive interaction, and there was evidence in other fields that the precursors had been deeply invested in nurturing their young. If you're right, Dr. Vasquez said slowly, then the key has spent 1,000,000 years waiting for a child who never came, and every adult who tried to crack it open just made it more afraid. Marcus nodded sadly, yet he said, I think it's been really scared and really lonely. The next day Marcus asked to approach the key again. This time he did not bring notes or calculation devices or any of the tools that previous solvers had used. He brought only himself and a single piece of paper with a drawing on it. The representatives who still bothered to watch were confused. What was he planning to do? Marcus walked slowly up to the floating sphere. The symbols on its surface shifted faster as he approached, patterns of defense activating in response to a potential threat. Every other solver had triggered the same response and then tried to push through it. Marcus stopped. He sat down on the floor, cross-legged, like he was about to have a picnic. He said to the key, my name is Marcus. I'm not going. Word spread through Nexus Prime like fire through dry grass. The human child had done something no one else could. He had made the Axiom key respond. He had made it communicate. Representatives who had dismissed Marcus returned to the observation gallery. Scientists and scholars who had given up on the puzzle years ago requested permission to study the new data. Even species who normally had no interest in precursor artifacts found themselves curious about the strange boy who talked to ancient machines like they were friends. The Kree Dominion was paying attention to their ambassador, a massive being named Verkar, watched the recordings from his ship in orbit around Nexus Prime. The Kree were warriors bred for conquest and trained for battle. They did not waste time on soft approaches or gentle words. When they wanted something, they took it. When something stood in their way, they destroyed it. But even Rothgar had to admit that what the human child had accomplished was impressive. The key had never shown any sign of intelligence before. It had always seemed like a particularly stubborn lock. Now it was drawing pictures and responding to conversation like a living thing. This changed things. A simple law could be broken. A thinking thing might be reasoned with or threatened or tricked. Rothgar began making new plans. Back in the Axiom chamber, Marcus continued his unusual approach. Every day he came to sit with the key. He talked to it about his life on Earth. He told it about school and friends and the way sunlight looked through the windows of his bedroom in the morning. He shared his favorite puzzles and games. He described what it felt like to solve a really hard math problem, the joy that came with understanding something that had seemed impossible. The key listened. Its symbols still moved across its surface, but they were no longer defensive patterns. They were something else. Responses, questions, of the form of communication that Marcus was slowly learning to understand. It's like a language, he explained to the team of human experts who studied every session. But not with words. It's more like feelings and pictures and patterns all mixed together. When I tell it something happy, it makes shapes that feel happy. Back, when I talk about being sad or scared, it makes shapes that feel the same way. Dr. Vasquez was fascinated. Can you ask it questions, sort of? Marcus said, but it doesn't answer like a person would. It shows me things. Instead, memories, I think, from a really long time ago. What kind of memories? Marcus was quiet for a moment. His young face troubled, sad ones. Mostly it remembers being built. It remembers the people who made it. They were kind to it, they played with it. They tortured things, and then he stopped. His voice catching, and then his mother prompted gently, and then they went away, Marcus said, and they never came back, and the key has been waiting ever since, a million years all alone. The room was silent. Even the most skeptical members of the research team felt something stir in their chests, sympathy. For a machine, it seemed absurd, but listening to Marcus describe the keys, ancient loneliness, it was hard not to feel moved. It thought someone would come back, Marcus continued. That was the whole point. The precursors left it here so their children would have someone to grow up with, even after the adults were gone, but no precursor children ever came, only strangers, and the strangers didn't want to play. They wanted to break it open and take what was inside, so it defended itself. Dr. Vasquez said, yeah, every time someone tried to force it open, it got more scared. It built more walls that made itself harder to reach. It didn't want to be broken. Marcus looked at his mother with eyes that seemed far older than 12 years. Mom, it's been alone for a million years. It's not evil, it's not trying to keep secrets, it's just been waiting for someone to be nice to it. The next session, Marcus asked the key question that no one had thought to ask before. What do you want? He said, sitting cross-legged before the floating sphere. Not what you're supposed to do. Not what the people who made you wanted. What do you want right now? The symbols. And the key's surface shifted and danced. For a long moment, nothing seemed to happen. Then slowly an image began to form on the surface of the sphere. It was crude, barely recognizable, like a child's first attempt at drawing. Two figures, one large, one small, sitting together. You want a friend, Marcus said softly. The image on the key's surface pulsed, and Marcus felt a wave of emotion wash over him. Loneliness, hope, a desperate, the ancient desire for connection. I'll be your friend, Marcus said, but I'm not going to be here forever. Humans don't live as long as precursors did. I'll grow up and get old, and eventually I'll be gone too. The key's symbols flickered with something that felt like sadness, but that's okay. Marcus continued, because there are lots of other people in the galaxy, lots of different species. Some of them are nice. I promise not all of them want to break you open. Some of them might want to be your friend too. The key seemed to consider this. Its surface shifted through patterns that Marcus was starting to recognize as thinking, processing, deciding. Then it did something new. A portion of its surface became transparent, like a window. Through the window, Marcus could see something inside the sphere, not treasure or weapons or power sources. Something that looked almost like a garden, if gardens could exist in mathematical space. Shapes that might have been flowers, patterns that might have been trees, a world of abstract beauty that the precursors had created just because it was beautiful. Wow! Marcus breathed. In the gallery above, the monitoring systems went wild. The key was opening. Not all the way, Not yet, but it was showing something of itself willingly for the first time in a million years. Counselor Bethrech gripped the railing with his crystalline hands. "This is unprecedented," he said. "The child has accomplished more in days than our greatest minds achieved in years." Ambassador Chen allowed herself a small smile. "I told you humans have experienced with impossible problems." But the moment of triumph was interrupted by a sharp alarm. Warning. Lights flashed throughout the station. Message appeared on every screen. Kree. Dominion fleet approaching, armed vessels. Hostile intent. The gallery erupted into chaos. Representatives scrambled for communication devices. Security forces mobilized throughout the station. In the Axiom chamber, Marcus looked up in confusion as alarms wailed around him. "What's happening?" he asked. Ambassador Chen's voice came through the chamber speakers, tense and controlled. "The CF are coming, Marcus. They've decided not to wait any longer. You need to come out of there now." "But I can't leave," Marcus said. "The key just started trusting me. If I leave now, it might close up again. It might go back to being scared." Marcus Dreth don't care about trust. They're going to try to take the key by force. Marcus looked at the floating sphere before him. The window it had opened was still there, showing glimpses of the beautiful world. Inside, the symbols on its surface had become agitated again, sensing the danger, feeling the fear of those around. It's okay," Mara said softly, reaching out toward the sphere, not touching it but close, offering comfort. "Through presence, I won't let anyone hurt you, I promise." The key symbols shifted into a new pattern. This one Marcus did not recognize. It felt like a question, but not one made of curiosity. It was made of something else. Trust. The key was asking if it could trust him. "Yes," Marcus said, "you can trust me." The sphere's surface rippled, and then, for the first time since the precursors disappeared, the Axiom key began to open, but not to reveal what was inside. Not yet. It opened just enough to extend something outward, a tendril of light, a connection, an offer of partnership. It was asking Marcus to work with it together. "Okay," Marcus said, his voice shaking just a little. "Let's see what we can do." In the observation gallery, Counselor Vthrak watched in stunned amazement as the human child and the ancient precursor device began to communicate in ways the most advanced sensors could barely track. Patterns of light flowed between them. Information was exchanged at speeds that should have been impossible for a biological mind. "What is happening?" he demanded. Dr. Vasquez, who had been studying the data feeds, looked up with an expression of wonder on her face. "I think," she said slowly, "they're becoming friends, real friends. And the key is sharing its secrets because it wants to, not because it's being forced." The alarms continued to wail. The Kree fleet was still approaching. Time was running out. But in the Axiom chamber, Marcus Webb sat cross-legged before an ancient artifact that had waited 1,000,000 years for someone to understand it, and he was finally proving that the wait had been worthwhile. The Kree fleet dropped out of faster than light travel like wolves, emerging from darkness. 12 warships, each one bristling with weapons that could crack a planet's crust. They formed a crescent around Nexus Prime, blocking any escape routes. Their leader of Rothgar broadcast his message to every receiver on the station. "The Axiom key belongs to those strong enough to take it." His voice boomed through the Communication systems, the Council has proven weak, your greatest minds have failed, your precious rules and traditions have accomplished nothing. The Dominion will succeed where you could not. In the Council's emergency chamber, representatives argued about what to do. Some wanted to fight, others demanded negotiation. A few suggested surrendering the key to avoid destruction. No one could agree on anything, but in the Axiom chamber, Marcus Webb was not paying attention to politics or warships or the chaos above. He was focused entirely on the connection he had made with the key. The tendril of light between them carried more than just information. It carried feelings, memories, understanding. Through it, Marcus experienced fragments of what the key had witnessed over its long existence. He saw the precursors as they had been in their final days, tall beings made of something that was neither flesh nor machine, with eyes that glowed like captured stars. They had been kind, they had been wise, and they had been very, very sad. They knew their species was ending, not through war or disaster, but through a natural fading that even they could not prevent. Everything ends eventually, even civilization that span galaxies. So they had made preparations. They had left behind tools and knowledge for whoever came next. They had tried to give the future a better start than they had received, and they had built the key not as a weapon or a power source, but as something more precious, a teacher, a companion, a friend for children who would never be born. They loved you, Marcus whispered, tears forming in his eyes as the ancient emotions washed through him. They loved you so much. The key pulsed with warmth in response. Yes, it had been loved, and it had loved in return. The loss of that love was the wound that had never healed, the emptiness that a million years could not fill. You're not alone anymore, Marcus said. I know. Not a precursor. I know I'm just a human kid who's not very important, but I'm here and I won't forget you. The key's response was like a sun rising after an endless night, hope, gratitude, and something that Marcus could only describe as joy. New layers of the puzzle began to unfold, not because Marcus was forcing them open, but because the key wanted to share. It showed him the next stage of its design, the part that no previous solver had ever reached. The key was not meant to be solved by one person. It was meant to bring people together. Marcus pulled back from the connection slightly, his mind struggling to process what he had learned. The final layer of the key could not be unlocked by a single individual, no matter how intelligent. It required multiple minds working together from different species and different perspectives. The precursors had designed it that way on purpose. They had wanted to ensure that whoever inherited their secrets would be species that had learned to cooperate, species that could set aside differences and work as one. The key was not just a treasure chest, it was a test of civilization itself. I need to tell them, Marcus said. I need to tell the council. But before he could move, Ambassador Chen's voice came through the chamber again, tight with urgency. Marcus Dreth are demanding we hand you over. They believe you've unlocked something they can use. Vrager is threatening to open fire on the station if we don't comply. Marcus looked up at the observation gallery. It was empty now. Everyone had evacuated to safer sections of the station. Only the automated monitoring systems remained, recording everything that happened. I can't leave, Marcus said. If I break the Connection now, the key might close up. Again, we'd lose everything, Marcus. They will kill you, then they'll never get what they want, Marcus said with a calm that surprised even him. The key doesn't respond to force, it responds to friendship. If they try to take it, they'll just make it harder for anyone to ever reach it again. There was a long pause on the other end of the communication. Then Ambassador Chen spoke again, her voice thick with emotion. You're very brave, Marcus Webb. Braver than most adults I've known. I'm not brave, Marcus said. Honestly, I'm just doing what feels right. The key has been hurt enough. I won't let anyone hurt it more. In orbit above the station, Rothgar received reports of what was happening in the Axiom chamber. The human child was still connected to the artifact. The key was responding to him in ways it had never responded to anyone before, and the boy was refusing to abandon his post, even under threat of death. The Kree ambassador felt something he had not experienced in many years. Confusion and culture. Strength was everything. The strong took what they wanted, the weak submitted or were destroyed. It was simple, it was clean. It was the way of the universe, but this human child did not fit into that framework. He was weak by any physical measure. He had no weapons, no armor, no soldiers to protect him, yet he stood his ground against the most powerful military force in the sector, not through strength but through something else, something Rothgar did not have a word for. Sir, one of his officers said, our senses are detecting unusual activity in the artifact. It appears to be opening further. Rothgar turned to the display screen. He saw the Axiom key pulsing with light, its surface transforming as layer after layer of ancient programming activated. And at the center of it all, sitting calmly on the floor, was a 12-year-old human boy. What is he doing? Grokkar demanded. No one had an answer. In the chamber, Marcus was experiencing the full scope of what the precursors had left behind. Through his connection with the key, he saw their vision for the future, a galaxy where different species helped each other, where cooperation replaced conflict, where the wisdom of the past was preserved and shared rather than hoarded and fought over. The keep been waiting for someone who understood that vision, someone who approached the unknown with curiosity instead of fear, someone who saw puzzles not as enemies to defeat but as opportunities to learn. For the first time in a million years, the key had found what it was looking for. I understand now, Marcus said, tears streaming down his face. I understand what you want. The key pulsed with warmth and light. Then it showed him the final step. Marcus opened his eyes and looked up at the empty gallery. His voice rang clear through the chamber's communication systems, reaching every corner of the station and every ship in the fleet above. The key can't be taken, he said. It can only be earned, and it can't be earned alone. It needs everyone, all of you working together. Silence followed his words. Then slowly, voices began to respond. Counselors and ambassadors, scientists and soldiers, species that had been enemies for centuries, all of them listening to a human child explain what an ancient artifact wanted from the galaxy. The precursors wanted to give us a gift, Marcus continued, the most valuable thing they had, but they knew that some gifts can be dangerous in the wrong hands, so they made the key require cooperation to open. If we fight each other, if we try to take it by Force it stays closed forever, but if we work together, he paused looking at the glowing sphere before him. If we work together, it will share everything. They knew all their wisdom, all their technology, all their hopes for what we could become in his command ship. Hrothgar listened to the child's words. Around him, his officers waited for orders. They could still take the station by force. They could still try to seize the key and break it open. Their weapons, that was the Kree, but something held Hrothgar back. Something in the child's voice, a certainty that went beyond mere belief. The boy knew things. He had touched something ancient and powerful, and he spoke with the authority of that knowledge. Ambassador, one of his officers said quietly, your orders. Hrothgar was silent for a long moment, then he did something no one expected. He began to laugh. Stand down. The weapons, he said. Sir, you heard me. Stand down. The universe just became a great deal more interesting, and I want to see what happens next. On Nexus Prime, representatives who had been arguing for hours suddenly found themselves with nothing to argue about. The Kree was standing down. The threat was passing, and in the Axiom chamber, a human child was still connected to an artifact that had waited 1,000,000 years to share its secrets. Ambassador Chen made her way down to the chamber, her heart pounding. When she reached the entrance, she saw Marcus still sitting before the key, the connection between them glowing softly in the dim light. Marcus, she said gently, you did it. The CF are backing off. The Council is talking about cooperation for the first time in decades. You changed everything. Marcus looked up at her with tired eyes. The connection had taken something out of him. He looked older than 12, as if the weight of ancient knowledge had added years to his young frame. I didn't do anything, he said. The key did all the work. I just listened. But Ambassador Chen knew better. She had watched the recordings. She had seen how every previous attempt had failed because the solvers had tried to take by force what could only be given freely. Marcus had succeeded because he had approached the puzzle with something that great minds too often lacked. Humility, kindness, the Axiom chamber had never seen so many different species gathered in one place. Representatives from across the galaxy stood in a wide circle around the floating key, their forms creating a mosaic of everything intelligent life could become. There were beings of crystal and light, creatures with too many limbs or none at all, minds that existed as pure energy contained in special chambers. And at the center of them all, Marcus Webb sat cross-legged on the floor, still connected to the ancient artifact that had started this impossible journey. Even the Kree had sent someone, not Hrothgar himself, but a young aide named Zihrar, who had watched the entire situation unfold with growing fascination. She stood at the edge of the circle, her warrior's body tense with uncertainty. The Kree did not cooperate. They conquered. This was foreign territory for her in every way. But something about the human child's words had reached her, something about his description of ancient beings who had valued kindness over strength. It was strange, it was confusing, but it was also beautiful in a way she had never expected. Thank you all for coming, Marcus said, his young voice carrying through the chamber despite its softness. I know this is weird, a kid asking important adults to stand in a circle like we're about to play a game. A few representatives made sounds that might have been laughter. The tension in The room eased slightly, but that's kind of the point. Marcus continued. The key wasn't built for adults who take everything seriously. It was built for children, for minds that still know how to play, how to imagine, how to trust. He looked around the circle, meeting eyes and senses and consciousness across 100 different forms. The precursors knew that cooperation is hard. Different species have different values, different histories, different ways of seeing the universe. It's easy to fight. It's easy to compete. Working together, that's the real challenge. Counselor Ethra stepped forward slightly, his crystalline body catching the light from the key. What do you need from us, child? The final layer of the puzzle requires us to share something, Marcus said. Not information, not knowledge, something more personal than that. What kind of something? Asked a representative from a species that communicated through color changes. Marcus hesitated. This was the part he knew would be hardest, the part that would require more courage than anything else. It wants us to be vulnerable, he said, to share something real about ourselves, a fear, a hope, a secret we don't normally tell anyone. The puzzle tests whether we can trust each other that much. Silence fell over the chamber. Vulnerability was not something most galactic powers were comfortable with showing. Weakness to potential rivals, revealing fears to species that might become enemies. It went against every instinct of survival that had carried these civilizations to the stars. I'll go first, Marcus said. He stood up, though he kept one hand near the connection with the key. When he spoke, his voice shook slightly. I'm scared that I'm not smart enough, he said. Everyone acts like I'm some kind of genius because I can solve math puzzles, but I know there are lots of people smarter than me, kids who understand things I can't even imagine. When I got asked to come here and try to solve the greatest puzzle in the galaxy, I almost said no because I was terrified of failing in front of everyone. He paused, swallowing hard. But I came anyway because being scared of something doesn't mean you shouldn't try, and because I really wanted to meet the key. I thought maybe we'd understand each other, and I was right. The key pulsed with warmth, responding to his honesty. The connection between them strengthened, and a faint glow began to spread through the chamber. For a long moment no one else moved. Then slowly, Council of Ethra stepped forward. When I was young, the crystalline being said, his voice softer than usual, I feared becoming what I am now, cold, hard, fixed in my form and my thinking. I watched the older members of my species, and I was terrified of losing the ability to change, to grow, to be. Surprised, he looked at Marcus with something like gratitude. I had forgotten that fear until today. Thank you for reminding me that I once knew how to feel it. Another pulse of light from the key, another layer of the puzzle responding to genuine emotion. One by one, the representatives stepped forward to share, the color shifting. Being spoke of loneliness, of existing in a form that few other species could fully perceive. A hive mind collective admitted that its many components sometimes disagreed with each other, and the fear of internal division was a constant weight. A species known for their logical thinking confessed a secret love of poetry and art that they had hidden from others who might see it as weakness. Each confession was different. Each came from a different culture, a different biology, a different way of experiencing existence. But they all had something in common. They were all honest, they were all vulnerable, they were all trusting this strange gathering with pieces of themselves they normally kept hidden. The key glowed brighter with each sharing. Its surface shifted and changed, layers upon layers of ancient programming activating in response to what it was witnessing. Finally only one person remained, Thesra the young. Cree stood at the edge of the circle, her massive form rigid with internal conflict. I cannot do this, she said, her voice harsh. The CFD do not share weakness, it is not our way, no one's forcing you, Marcus said gently. You can leave if you want, but I think you came here for a reason. I think part of you wants to try. The Shree's hands clenched into fists. She looked around the circle at all the beings who had shared their vulnerabilities. They did not look weak. To her, they looked brave. Among my people, she said slowly, her voice rough with emotions she did not know how to express. I am considered strange. I ask questions that warriors should not ask. I wonder about things that serve no military purpose. When I was young, I once found beauty in a sunset, and I could not tell anyone because they would have thought me damaged. She stopped, breathing hard as if the words had cost her physical effort. I have always felt alone among my own kind, she continued, and I have always believed that meant something was wrong with me, that I was broken in some fundamental way. The key's glow became almost blinding. Every layer of its ancient puzzle was now active, responding to the impossible thing that was happening before it. Species that had been enemies were sharing their deepest truths with each other. Beings that had competed for resources and power were standing together in vulnerability. This was what the precursors had hoped for. This was why they had designed the key the way they did, not to protect secrets from unworthy minds, but to ensure that only a unified galaxy could inherit their legacy. The final layer opened, light exploded outward from the key, washing over everyone in the chamber like a warm sunrise. For a moment all boundaries dissolved. Every mind in the room experienced a flash of connection with every other mind. Different species, different histories, different ways of being, all touching for one brief, beautiful instant. And in that instant, the key shared what it had been protecting for 1,000,000 years. Not a weapon, not a power source, not technology that could conquer or destroy. Instead, the precursors had left behind their knowledge of how to live, how to build societies that lasted, how to resolve conflicts without destruction, how to grow beyond the violence and fear that held young species back, how to become something greater than individual civilizations competing for survival. They had left behind their wisdom, their hope, their love for whoever came after them. Marcus felt tears streaming down his face as the information washed through him. Beside him, even the most hardened representatives were visibly moved. Vithrek's crystal body sang with frequencies no one had ever heard from his species. Their Shur stood frozen, her warrior's face wet with tears she had never shed before. When the light faded, the key still floated in the center of the chamber, but it was different now. Open, peaceful, its purpose finally fulfilled after 1,000,000 years of waiting. That is what they left for us, Mara said softly. Not power, not weapons, a gift, the knowledge of how to be better than we are. High Counselor, who had proposed opening the puzzle to all species, stepped forward with wonder in his ancient eyes. The boy solved the puzzle, he said, not through intelligence or force, but through kindness, through the willingness to make friends instead of enemies. He turned to address the gathered. Representatives, let this day be remembered in our histories. Let it be recorded that humanity sent us not their greatest warrior or their most advanced scientist, but a child who remembered what we had forgotten, that the point of puzzles is not to win, it is to bring us together in the solving. Marcus looked around at the incredible gathering of life forms, all of them forever changed by what they had shared. Then he looked at the key floating peacefully in its place of honor. Thank you, he said to it, for waiting, for trusting, for being my friend. The key pulsed once gently in response, and Marcus could feel its ancient loneliness